Hey guys, tonight, we slip quietly into the dust and whispers of a world that feels far away, until it doesn't. You're barefoot on a dry path, rough stones pressing into your soles, the summer air thick with dung smoke, rosemary, and something older still. You've just been married because your father said so, and you're already wondering if that was a mistake. You walk past squat, timber-framed cottages where women boil nettles and babies wail like curses. Your new husband is up ahead, leading the way to his family's village. His back is broad but sunburnt, and he hasn't said much since the ceremony. The path dips. A crooked signpost points to a hamlet you've never heard of. You carry only a bundle, 2 linen shifts, a comb of carved wood, and your mother's silver cross tucked deep into the folds. Your braid itches against your neck in the heat. A fly won't leave your ear alone. You swat at it, and suddenly, it's not a wedding walk, it's a sentence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love seeing how far we all travel together. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your new home is smaller than you expected. The thatch roof is uneven and the fence is more suggestion than boundary, but it's clean in a rough sort of way. Your husband's mother is already waiting. She has a face like a shovel and eyes that never blink long enough. She pats your arm, then walks off, muttering something about broth. Inside, it smells of smoke, sweat, and hay. There's a single bed and a stool. Your chest tightens. You expected more. The wedding was short, the priest rushed, and the gift was a chicken already missing half its feathers. You'd imagined flowers, music, or at least laughter. But that's fairy tale nonsense, isn't it? As the sun lowers, the heat doesn't. Your new husband? His name is Joran, by the way. Doesn't talk much. He pulls his boots off, splashes water on his face from a bowl, then climbs into bed and snores like a saw against bark. No words of comfort, no sweet nothings. Just breath, sweat, and weight. So you sit on the stool tracing circles in the dirt with your toe. A spider crawls along the windowsill. You watch it for too long, and in that strange stillness, a deep itch grows beneath your ribs. You need to be clean. By morning, the itch has turned into something physical. Not just from the dusty bed or your sweaty clothes, but deep down. You need to rinse to breathe, to remember your body isn't just something to be passed like property. Joran mumbles something about helping with the goats. You nod, then grab your shift and slip out. A woman from a neighboring cottage sees you squints and nods with vague disapproval. You offer a small wave and keep walking. You know about the stream. Joran mentioned it in passing. Clear water 1/2 mile west, safe enough if it ain't rained. That's where you're going. You wrap your arms around yourself as the trees close in the chirping of crickets building into a soft forest lullaby. Soon the trees thin, and there it is, the stream. Shallow and winding, the banks lined with soft moss and reeds. A small pile of smooth stones marks a place where others have bathed before. A heron lifts off, startled by your presence, and you grin for the first time since the wedding. You dip your toes in. Cold, clean, real. You glance around, no one in sight. The forest holds its breath with you. You peel off your shift and wade in, letting the water fold around your ankles, then knees. You submerge yourself, careful not to scream as the chill climbs your spine. It's quiet here, beautiful even. A dragonfly skims the surface. You scrub under your arms, between your toes, behind your ears. You run fingers through your hair, letting the water carry away wedding dust and fear. And just when you start to feel human again, you feel it. That itch between your shoulder blades. Not the spider this time. Someone is watching you. You freeze. Slowly, you turn, nothing there. Just trees, moss silence. But your gut knows before your brain does. You step backward in the water chest, tightening heart, fluttering like a trapped bird. A branch creaks. A boot shifts. Then just behind a thick bush, a face. Not Joran's. His brother. His name is Tharn. He's older, taller, with eyes too still and a mouth too calm. He steps out, arms raised as if in apology. Didn't mean to startle you. He says, gaze fixed exactly where it shouldn't be. Didn't know anyone was bathing. You hold your arms over your chest. Body half submerged, shivering. You need to leave. Course. Just passing through. He lingers. Too long. And in that moment, the summer air turns to lead. You don't say another word. You just stare. Tharn, to his credit, or maybe to his calculation, finally looks away. His boots crunch the underbrush as he steps backward, slowly, then turns. Leaves rustle. Twigs snap. Then nothing. He's gone. Except, not really. Because his presence clings to the air long after the sound of his retreat fades. You feel it on your skin, even after you've scrubbed every inch again, harder this time, until your knuckles ache and your arms redden. The cold water doesn't feel fresh anymore. It feels like a net. You wade out shaking, wrap yourself in your damp shift, and hurry barefoot back toward the village. You keep telling yourself, maybe it was an accident, a mistake. He was out hunting. He took the wrong path. Maybe he really didn't know you'd be there. But your body doesn't believe you. Your body remembers the stillness in his eyes, that calculated pause, the absence of apology behind the words. When you get back, Joran is at the pen tossing hay to goats. You stop for a moment, unsure whether to say something. But what would you say? Your brother stared at me naked while I bathed. That kind of sentence doesn't land softly. So you say nothing, and you hate that. Dinner is lentils and barley bread. The fire crackles too loud. Joran eats fast, as if swallowing ends the day sooner. You sit across from him, trying not to glance toward the third stool at the table. But then the door creaks open, and in walks Tharn, casual as a cat brushing leaves from his sleeves. You freeze mid-bite. Joran nods toward the pot, still warm. Tharn smiles, sits, and ladles stew into a bowl. Long walk, he says. Ran into a heron by the stream. Odd birds. He looks directly at you when he says it. No smirk, no wink, just enough insinuation to twist your stomach. You stand to wash your bowl hands, trembling slightly. Water splashes louder than it should in the basin. No one speaks. This is how secrets get planted in a village like this, not as events, but as atmospheres, as things that live between glances and grow. After dinner, Joran steps outside to smoke his little clay pipe. You hover near the hearth, pretending to sort herbs. Tharn stays seated, staring at the fire. Then he speaks without looking at you. You shouldn't bathe alone. The woods can be dangerous. You clench your jaw. I didn't ask for company. He finally looks up. Just be careful. His voice is soft. Too soft. You walk out without answering. That night in bed beside Joran, the silence is unbearable. He turns his back to you as always. You watch the flickering shadows cast by the dying fire, and you don't sleep. Not really, because something bad has started, and deep down, you know it. You wake early the next morning. Roosters crow. A cow lows somewhere down the lane. You rise quietly, dress, and step outside into the cool mist. The village is still not yet awake. That's when you notice something strange. Tharn is already up. He's at the well drawing water, whistling softly, but the tune isn't cheerful. It's something lilting and minor unsettling in the morning air. He doesn't see you, or maybe he does and pretends not to. You step back into the house before he turns. As you light the hearth for porridge, your thoughts spin. There are rules in this place, old and strange. Things you half remember from whispered warnings as a girl. One of them floats up now. If a woman is seen bathing by a man, not her husband, shame clings to her, whether she wished it or not. That's the problem with shame. It sticks to the one least responsible. Later that day, as you collect eggs from the hens, a young girl you think her name is Mila wanders by. She stops at the fence and leans in. "You should be more careful," she says, not unkindly. "My gran says the stream isn't proper for new wives." You frown. "I was just washing." Mila shrugs. Still, folks talk. She runs off before you can respond. And there it is. Already people know, or suspect, or invent. And in a place like this, that's all it takes. You try to shake it off to focus on chores, but the day stretches heavy. When you pass Tharn outside the barn, he nods and says, "Evenin'," like he didn't steal something from you through a curtain of leaves. At dinner again, there's tension in the room, but no one addresses it. Joran talks about a fence post that needs replacing. You nod. Tharn mentions traps he set in the eastern woods. You don't respond. The fire cracks. Later that night, as you unbraid your hair by candlelight, Joran watches you. "You all right?" he asks, eyes narrowed. You nod too quickly. "Fine, just tired." He pauses. Then, Tharn said, "You crossed paths yesterday." Your breath catches. You meet his eyes. At the stream. I didn't expect him there. Joran watches you a little too long, then nods once. He said the same. And that's that, except it isn't, because now it's in the air. Between you and Tharn, between you and Joran, between you and the entire village soon enough. In medieval towns, reputations are currency, and women, well, you're always walking the edge of a knife, aren't you? Historians still argue whether accusations like this were truly about virtue or simply power. Another way to control a woman's movements, her modesty, even her bath. You wish you could argue your own case, but here silence is safer than truth. For now, you avoid the stream after that. You avoid the path to it, the trees near it, even the scent of damp moss on your clothes. You wash with a bucket, now cold metallic water, carried from the well, splashed in brief gulps behind the cottage when no one is watching. It isn't the same. It never will be. But safety, or at least the illusion of it, seems worth the chill. Joran says less each day. He's gone by sunup, returns by sundown. He eats. He nods. He sleeps. You're not sure if he's angry or simply uninterested. Maybe both. But Tharn lingers. At first he doesn't speak. He just watches. When you hang laundry, you feel his eyes. When you carry feed to the goats, you sense a presence just beyond the fence. You turn, and it's him. Leaning against a tree, always with that too polite smile. Then the comments begin. "Early chores suit you," he says. once watching you shake out sheets. Funny how the hens lay more when you're near. He remarks another morning crouched in the dirt, whittling a stick. Always quiet. Always with that voice, just soft enough to seem harmless, just loud enough to mean something else entirely. One day, you're kneeling in the herb garden fingers, deep in the soil, when he approaches again. This time, he crouches beside you. You know he murmurs, "It wasn't the first time I saw someone at the stream. Others go there. I just hadn't expected it to be you." You stand abruptly. The mint leaves you were picking fall to the dirt. Then don't go near it. His eyes stay level with yours. Wasn't planning to, but I keep remembering the way the sunlight looked on your shoulders. You slap him. Not hard, but loud. The sound echoes between the fences. For a moment, you're proud of it. Then you realize who saw. 2 old men sitting on the bench outside the smithy, squinting at you like they've just witnessed a crow peck at a priest's bread. And Tharn, he doesn't scowl, doesn't raise a hand. He just steps back, rubbing his cheek and smiling. Smiling like he's won something. By the next morning, the air is changed. Again. At the well, the baker's wife doesn't speak. She just lifts her bucket, hoists it, and leaves. The blacksmith's daughter, who once offered you a spare loaf, walks past without meeting your gaze. Someone, probably a child, has scratched a crude drawing in the dust near your fence. It looks like a woman bathing, and someone watching from the trees. You wipe it away before Joran sees. But the damage spreads like smoke. And of course he sees anyway. Your kneading dough, when he steps inside, slams the door and stares at you with something sharp in his eyes. "You struck my brother," he asks. You swallow. He was speaking out of turn. That's not what he said. Your hands still. The dough droops. What did he say? Joran steps forward. He said you've been tempting him, that you lingered too long in the stream, that you... He cuts himself off, jaw clenched. You whisper, "That's not true. He said you begged him not to tell." Joran. Your voice cracks. He's lying. Silence. You can hear the wind pressing against the wooden walls, a rooster crowing in the distance, a cartwheel creaking somewhere down the road. Finally, Joran speaks again. He said he'll forgive you if you stay away from him. The absurdity of it stings harder than the insult. "Forgive me." Joran nods. He's willing to drop it. And that's when you realize it's not about belief. It's about comfort. Joran wants to believe Tharn, because the alternative, your truth, would require action, courage, risk. And maybe he's just not that kind of man. Medieval justice was rarely fair, especially inside families. Historians still argue whether households were meant to protect or contain women. Either way, the home becomes a kind of cage. That night, you sleep facing the wall. Joran does too. The fire dies early. In the morning, you wake before dawn and creep out quietly, hoping to clear your thoughts near the edge of the forest. But the village stirs earlier than usual. Voices murmur. Doors creak. Then you see them 2 boys tugging a goat past your cottage, whispering behind cupped hands. An older woman walks by, deliberately crossing herself when she sees you. You're marked now. Whether you're guilty or not hardly matters. The reputation spreads like spilled ale, impossible to clean. You try to keep your head down to do your chores, to stay invisible. But invisibility is no shield when people decide to see what they want. That afternoon, while picking wild onions, you hear footsteps behind you. Not loud, measured. You turn, and there he is again. Tharn, arms folded, face calm. "You shouldn't have hit me," he says softly. "You shouldn't have lied, you snap." He steps closer. "I didn't lie. Not really. I just told a version that made more sense. You're disgusting." He shrugs. "No one else thinks so." You feel your hands clench into fists. He reaches out, brushing a strand of hair from your face before you can recoil. It doesn't have to be like this. It already is. And you run. Back toward the cottage, toward whatever's left of safety, though it feels increasingly like a shrinking island. That night, you wait for Joran to ask, to say anything. He doesn't. Instead, he eats in silence, finishes his stew, and sets the bowl down. Then he says, "Maybe you should speak to the priest." The words hit like a slap. "I didn't do anything," you whisper. He looks away. "I know," he says, but his voice doesn't sound like belief. It sounds like surrender. You walk to the chapel the next morning, with dirt on your hem and a question on your tongue. You already know you won't be brave enough to ask. The chapel isn't much, just timber and thatch, like everything else in this village. The crucifix above the door is crooked, and the bell doesn't work unless you kick the post. You step inside, and your bare feet scrape the rough wood of the threshold. Inside, it smells of wax and old rain. Father Eldrick waits near the altar, a man with more beard than warmth. His hands are always clasped like he's hiding something, and his sermons have the warmth of boiled cabbage. But he smiles when he sees you, and something about the way his eyes scan you from crown to heel makes your skin crawl. "Child," he says, too sweet. "Come in. Your husband told me you were troubled." You nod. That's all you do, because if you speak, you might scream. He motions to the bench. You sit. A candle flickers beside you. He settles in beside the altar, opening a dusty book with theatrical care. His voice is soft now, like silk soaked in vinegar. It is not uncommon. You know he begins for new wives to feel out of place. Temptation, even in the smallest form, is part of our cursed inheritance. You stare at the candle. He goes on, but there are ways to cleanse, to return to the path, with prayer, with reflection, with obedience. You look up, cleanse what exactly. His smile tightens. Well, only you and God know. Then you realize you've been put on trial just without a jury or a verdict. Because here, a confession is expected, whether you have anything to confess or not. "I didn't sin," you say softly but firmly. The priest hums, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. Still confession soothes the soul. He leans forward, elbows on knees. "Was it your husband's brother?" The pause is so long you could hang a whole harvest on it. You blink. What did he tempt you? His eyes glint now. "You must be honest, child. I didn't do anything." He sighs. No woman ever believes she has. And there it is, the wall you've been shoved against. Because in this place your word weighs less than a man's gaze, even less than a priest's smirk. Father Eldrick continues gently now, like he's laying out sheep's wool for slaughter. There are herbs to purify the body, vigils that keep temptation at bay, and water. You frown. Water ritual immersion. In the church basin, alone, after dark. You don't respond. "You'll feel reborn," he adds, like the Virgin herself. The candle sputters. You leave before he can say more. You don't run. You walk slowly, because you're afraid to seem afraid. But inside, everything is tightening, coiling. By the time you reach the edge of the village, your face is hot, your fists clenched and your faith in ashes. You don't go home immediately. You go to the woodshed instead, where the goats are penned and the tools hang in rows. You stare at the iron hook for a long time, meant for hanging lanterns or drying herbs. But in your mind, it's for escape. You shake the thought away. Behind you, a cough. You spin. Tharn. He's holding a pail of feed, pretending he didn't just follow you. The priest speaks highly of you, he says. You blink. You've been talking to him. He shrugs, only to express concern. Concern you repeat like the word tastes sour. He steps closer. You've looked so troubled. You grip the wooden post behind you. Because you made me into a liar. Tharn smiles. Or maybe I just saw something you're afraid to admit. That's when something inside you snaps. Not like a twig, but like a beam under too much weight. I should scream, you say flatly. No one would believe you. He replies, calm as ever. You don't scream, not because he's right, but because he's not entirely wrong. Instead, you go back to the cottage. You say nothing to Joran. You make supper. You lay the table. You eat. But each movement feels like a ritual of surrender. You are being erased one small act at a time. That night, Joran finally speaks. Did Father Eldrick offer guidance? You nod. He told me to bathe in holy water. Alone, after dark. Joran frowns. Seems odd. You look him dead in the eye. He wasn't the only odd thing. He doesn't press further. You wish he would. Historians still debate how often religious authority crossed into personal vengeance during the Middle Ages, but in small villages with no courts and no witnesses. Justice was often just a man in robes speaking for God. The next day, at the well, something shifts again. You're drawing water when the butcher's wife, a leathery woman with a face like dried bread, approaches. Heard you're seeking forgiveness, she says. You pause. Forgiveness. From what she smirks. That's always the question, isn't it? Later that afternoon, you pass 3 girls drawing flowers in the dirt with sticks. One of them, maybe 6 years old, whispers, "That's her when she sees you." You kneel and ask softly, "What do they say about me?" She shrinks. That you're why it rains when it's sunny. Superstition. Gossip. Everything except truth. By dusk, your head aches, your belly twists, and you know that if you stay here, stay silent, stay still, you'll vanish piece by piece into their stories. You think again of the iron hook, but then you remember something else. You remember the stream. Not Tharn's intrusion, but before that, the sunlight, the dragonfly, the feeling of washing away a world that wasn't yours. Maybe it can't be reclaimed, but maybe you can still fight for the part of yourself that remembers it. You rise early the next morning, earlier than anyone. The sky is still blue-gray, the sun no more than a smudge behind the trees. Birds haven't yet decided whether it's worth singing. You wrap a shawl over your shoulders and take nothing but yourself, not even your shoes. The earth is cold under your feet, dew slick on the grass. Your breath fogs faintly. You don't head toward the stream yet. First, you go to the edge of the village, where the elder trees grow, and sit beneath one legs tucked under you like a child, punished in silence. You're not crying, but your eyes sting. Then a rustle. Someone else is walking. Not Tharn, not Joran. A woman. Bent with age, her back hunched beneath layers of brown wool. Her name is Anselma. She doesn't speak much, but her eyes are sharp as flint. And the village still fears her in that superstitious, grandmotherly way. She carries herbs in a bundle and a walking stick in her fist. She pauses when she sees you. She says, as if she already knows. You don't say anything. After a long silence, she lowers herself onto the root beside you. You saw something you shouldn't, she murmurs, or someone saw you. You glance at her. Does it matter which? She snorts. Not to the men, not to the church, not to the whispers. Another silence. Did he touch you? No. But he looked. Yes. Another long hum. Men like that rot in the heart first. You swallow. What should I do? Anselma takes her time answering. She's winding something from her bundle, a string of dried nettles. She tears off a sprig and presses it into your palm. You let the village see you bleeding, and they'll call it proof of sin. You let them see you silent, and they'll call it proof of guilt. You stare at the nettle. So what's left? She looks up right at you. You find the truth, and you make it louder than the lies. She leaves you with the nettle in your hand. That night dinner is quiet again. Joran eats. You eat. Tharn doesn't come. Small mercies. You ask Joran, what would you do if someone wronged your brother's wife? He glances up. Depends on the wife. And there it is again. Doubt given shape and voice. After he's asleep, you lie awake, heart pounding. And you make your choice. You will not visit the stream for purification. You will return to the stream for clarity. Not to bathe, to remember, because you refuse to let someone else own the memory of your own body. You sneak out before midnight. The village is sleeping, or at least pretending to. You know where every creaky board lies, every rooster that startles at the moon. You make your way by moonlight, the path a ribbon of silver between black trees. It's quiet. Too quiet. The stream appears ahead like a dream you forgot and now remember in full color. The dragonfly isn't there, of course. Neither is the sun. But the sound is the same. That gentle trickle. The ripple of movement. The cool breath of something ancient. You kneel at the edge and dip your hand in. Cold, sharp, real. Then a sound behind you. A twig. You freeze. Please not him. Please not now. You turn, and it's Joran. He's standing a few feet away, barefoot too. Arms folded, face unreadable. I followed you, he says. Wasn't sure if I should. You stand slowly, water dripping from your fingertips. I needed to remember, you say simply. Joran looks at you a long time. I believed you, he says. Even then. I just didn't want the trouble that came with it. You stare at him. He continues, voice quieter now. But I've seen how he looks at you, how others talk, and I can't stand behind silence anymore. It's not an apology, but it's the closest thing you've gotten. You say, then do something. And he nods. He doesn't ask for your forgiveness. He doesn't offer comfort. He just takes your hand. Together, you walk back toward the village stream, water drying on your skin. The next day, something strange happens. Tharn doesn't show up. Not in the morning. Not by midday. By evening, murmurs begin. He's sick, some say. He's gone, say others. Joran doesn't speak of it, and you don't ask. Instead, you go to the well, draw your bucket, and wait. That's when the baker's wife finally speaks to you again. You were always the quiet kind, she says. I thought maybe you had something to hide. You meet her gaze. I did, but it wasn't shame. She nods once. That's enough. In the medieval world, a woman didn't need to be proven guilty. She only needed to appear less innocent than expected. Historians still argue whether gossip served as justice or poison in small communities like this. But in your case, maybe it can be both, and maybe you can turn the poison into something else, something like truth. For now, you watch the sun dip low. And the nettle sprig Anselma gave you, you've hung it above your door, not as protection, as a reminder. 3 days pass, and still no sign of Tharn. You don't ask questions, neither does Joran. But the village? Oh, the village asks plenty. He must have taken ill, someone says at the well, probably off chasing deer in the forest, another offers with a shrug. And Selma, who knows more than she lets on, just mutters, or the forest, chased back. You don't allow yourself to feel triumphant, not quite, but you breathe easier, you sleep longer, you eat without the taste of dread curdling your tongue. Even your hands stop shaking when you knead bread. And yet, his absence doesn't erase what happened. That's the truth you begin to carry quietly. Because healing in a place like this is not a clean break. It's a slow rebuild over splinters still embedded in your skin. One morning, the priest sends a boy with a message, a summons. You hesitate, but you go. The chapel looks the same, tired wood slumped candles, a dusting of ash that's been there since last week's sermon. Father Eldrick stands at the altar, arms folded like a crow over a carcass. Have you reconsidered your cleansing? He asks without greeting. You stand your ground. I came to speak, not to confess. His expression falters, slightly. That's a dangerous distinction. You reply, voice calm. Truth isn't always safe. He circles the altar. And what truth is that you level your gaze? Your holy bath was never about God. A long pause. The candle crackles. Be careful, child, he says at last. A woman's word can turn against her. You nod. So can a man's silence. And then you leave. Behind you, the chapel creaks like a thing exhaling its own rot. Later that day at the village square, a quiet gathering takes place, small like a shadow pretending not to exist. Women cluster around the well, older ones mostly. They don't say your name, but they talk about what happened. About him. It's Mila's grandmother, who speaks first voice low, but clear. He used to watch my daughter too. The baker's wife, mine, said he once brushed her skirt while pretending to light a lantern. And then Anselma. With her staff, she taps the stones underfoot. He was protected because he wore your last name, but he wore it like a wolf wears sheep's wool. They don't call it justice. They don't write it down, but it changes something. Later, Joran tells you quietly, they found his pack near the southern woods, torn, scattered. Might have been wolves. You don't ask if he believes that. You just whisper. Or maybe the trees got tired of watching. That night, Joran sits beside you by the hearth. He doesn't touch you, not yet, but he watches the flames with a look that seems older than the days since the wedding. He finally says, I should have protected you sooner. You nod, but now you're listening. And in a way, that matters more, because in medieval times, listening could save lives, or at least the memory of them. The next morning, for the first time in what feels like years, you walk to the stream. Alone, but not afraid. You stand at the water's edge and breathe in the scent of willow bark and mud and the faint sweetness of something flowering nearby. Your reflection ripples older now, wiser, still here. You wade in, not to wash away shame, but to reclaim it. The water is cold as always, but this time it feels like your own. You stay until the sun climbs higher, until the light breaks the canopy in golden stripes. Then, as you gather your shift, you spot something nestled between two mossy stones, a carved piece of wood worn smooth. A figure, female, holding her own face in her hands. A talisman, a warning, or maybe a gift from someone who came before you. You carry it home. At the cottage, Joran is splitting wood. He sees the figure in your hand and doesn't ask. Instead, he says, "Help me build a better door." And you do. You spend the day like that, sawing, lifting, hammering, rebuilding, literally and otherwise. At one point, he catches your wrist. I never asked what happened. Not truly. Do you want to tell me? You think about it. Then say, "One day. But for now, just help me finish the latch." Historians still argue whether women in medieval villages had agency or merely the illusion of it. But standing there, palms blistered from work, sweat on your brow hair pulled back, with a ribbon that's yours and no one else's, you feel something like agency blooming in your chest. Later, you plant mint and rosemary near the front stoop, the kind that keeps flies and men from getting too close. And as twilight settles and Selma walks by with her basket of bones and bark, she pauses, nods at your new doorway. "Strong wood," she says. You nod. "Strong woman." She grins. About time. You don't light the fire that night. You don't need to. Because for once, the silence inside your home is peace, not fear. The days grow longer. The sun lingers on the village roofs like it's reluctant to leave. You spend your mornings in the herb plot, and your afternoons mending clothes or weaving baskets. People nod when you pass them now, not with suspicion, but with the stiff courtesy reserved for someone who has been burned but didn't break. No one mentions Tharn anymore, not outright, but his absence echoes in conversations the way a missing tooth affects every bite. You hear fragments such as shame boys need. Better raising some men were never meant to marry, all spoken without names, as if names could summon spirits. Joran doesn't ask about it again. He builds. He repairs. He returns late from the woods with scratches on his arms and mud up to his knees. He never says what he's chasing. Maybe guilt, maybe understanding. One evening, he brings you a spindle of soft wool. You always liked weaving, right? You nod, surprised. Not by the gift, but by the quiet effort it represents. The next day, something strange happens. The village priest, yes, that one holds a sermon entirely on the dangers of silence. He doesn't look at you, but everyone else does. You sit on the back bench and don't flinch. He rails against temptation, against vanity, against the power of false speech. His words drip with righteousness, but the villagers shift uncomfortably. A few glance toward Anselma, who sits with arms folded like a storm in waiting. Afterward, the crowd disperses murmuring. No one lingers to thank him. That evening, you catch the blacksmith's daughter outside your fence. She hesitates. "I heard what he said, but my mother says not to trust a man who says God speaks only to him." You smile faintly. "Your mother's a wise woman. She said you were brave." "I just wanted to say that," and she runs off before you can thank her. Word travels in two directions here. Sometimes it poisons. Sometimes it heals. Still, not everything is safe. One night, a group of men drinking outside the tavern mutter just loud enough for you to hear as you pass. Women these days, getting bold, should have stayed by the hearth. Next thing, they'll be choosing their husbands. Laughter bitter as spoiled milk. You don't stop. But Joran walking beside you does. He turns, stares them down, says nothing. And in that nothing a small silence blooms, an uncomfortable one. Then a few of them look away. One stands and wanders off muttering about goats. Later Joran says, "It's not your job to change them. You answer, "It's not your job to shield me." Then after a beat, "But thank you anyway." You sit on the stoop that night watching fireflies drift across the fields. And Selma joins you uninvited. She brings 2 mugs of something sharp and herbal. She hands one to you. It's fennel and beetroot, and something I won't tell you. You sip it, cough, and blink. "You're trying to poison me." She grins. "If I wanted you dead, girl, you'd already be a story." You smile despite yourself. "Why did you help me?" You ask. She leans back, eyes scanning the sky. "Because someone should have helped me." Silence. And in that silence, a weight shifts. "I didn't always live here," she says. "I came after I lost a child. A boy. People whispered it was a punishment, that I'd been cursed, that I was too forward." You don't interrupt. Men have many ways of blaming women for their discomfort. Religion rumor, even kindness. You nod. "Do you believe in justice?" you ask softly. And Selma shrugs. "I believe in reckoning. Not always the same thing." And with that, she finishes her drink, stands, and leaves. A ghost with purpose. That night, as you drift to sleep beside Joran, who now offers you space and warmth in equal measure, you dream of the stream again. But this time, no eyes. Watch. No footsteps follow. Only willow branches swaying the water clean and laughing. Morning comes, and with it a chill that suggests autumn is reaching its fingers toward the village. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders and fetch water from the well. There you find a gathering. Not for drama, not for judgment. Just a handful of women exchanging seeds, talking about winter roots and what to stitch into quilts. You're invited to sit. No ceremony, no apology, just a space made for you. You join them. One of them, Mila's grandmother, leans over and says, "We're going to start a new rule, I think. Women don't wash alone anymore. Not because we're afraid, but because we keep each other safe." You nod. It's not a revolution, but it's a beginning. Historians still debate whether medieval women had true agency or merely pockets of resistance tucked between survival. But you know this. When women gather at the well, at the hearth, in the woods, they write history no chronicler can erase. That night, you hang herbs above the door. Not for protection, for memory. For the version of yourself that nearly vanished. For the girl who refused to be rewritten by another man's story. And in the quiet that follows, you sleep soundly. Not because the world is safe, but because you are safer in it. You return to the well most mornings now, not just for water, but for something else. A quiet exchange, a shared glance, a hand resting gently on a forearm, mid-sentence. Women here don't say everything out loud, but more and more they no longer say nothing. And Selma calls it weather watching. Feeling the climate shift in a place not used to change. The priest still preaches, of course, loudly, righteously. But fewer villagers attend his sermons, and those who do sit farther back. Not because they've turned heretic, but because they've turned aware. One day he stops you in the lane. "Child," he says, as though the word still fits. "I notice you've avoided the vigil I prescribed." You meet his eyes, calm flat. "I don't need a bath in cold water to know I'm clean." He stiffens. Defiance leads to downfall. You smile just enough. So does silence. Then you walk on, and the leaves behind you flutter like applause. That evening, Joran brings home a hen, a gift from a traveling merchant. It lays mottled eggs and pecks anyone who gets too close. You name it, regret. He laughs. That poor bird. No, you say. The name fits. Regret's a loud thing. It follows you everywhere, that bird. You grow fond of it. The seasons shift. You wrap yourself in wool shawls. You stitch the hem of your only cloak. You stock root vegetables and clean out the fire pit. The rhythm of preparation gives you structure, something your mind can lean on. And yet, as the wind sharpens and the nights deepen, memories come knocking. One morning, you wake to a dream of that night again, not the worst part of it, but the nearly. The creak of the door, the shape in the dark, your own body locking up like a gate slammed shut. You sit up, shivering. Joran stirs. Another dream. You nod. It's better now, but it still knocks. He touches your wrist lightly. You don't have to answer. You nod again, grateful, not just for his words, but for his new way of seeing. Later that day, you pass by the place where the stream meets the bend in the woods. You haven't returned since that final morning. This time you do. Just to see. It's quieter than you remember. The leaves have fallen, and the willows sway bare-limbed over the water. It reflects the gray sky like a dull mirror. You don't take your shoes off. You don't enter. But you do stand at the edge and say aloud, "This was never my shame to carry." And then you turn and walk away. You don't look back. That's the new difference. Back in the village, a few young wives have started walking in pairs, to the well, to the market, to the outer fields. Not because they're afraid, but because there's power in not walking alone. You notice it. So do others. One afternoon, Mila's grandmother shows up at your door with a bundle of thread. "Teach me the weave you use," she says. "Mine's too loose." You sit together on the stoop and share techniques. Hers are older. Yours are tighter. She teaches you a knot that doesn't slip, and you trade her 2 fingers' width of dyed wool. The wind picks up. She doesn't flinch. You made them nervous. You know, she says. "Who?" "The men. The priest. Even your husband at first." You tilt your head. "Good." She cackles. "But you also gave some of them room to change," she adds. "And that's rarer than most think. You think about that as you boil soup later that night." Historians still argue whether men in medieval villages were agents of change or prisoners of the same system. But some, like Joran, begin to slip their chains link by link. You find his hands less heavy these days, not physically, but emotionally. He no longer carries you like a duty, more like a partner. Once he even says, "I'm sorry I let it happen so long." You don't answer right away. "Then thank you for seeing it now." That's enough. For now. One night, the village gathers near the fire circle for a late harvest celebration. Baskets of roasted chestnuts, cider in clay cups, dried apples on strings. You're hesitant to go, but Anselma elbows you out the door. You're not haunting the past tonight, she orders. You're dancing. You laugh. I don't dance. You do now. And you do. Slowly, at first. Just a sway. A shuffle. The music is nothing more than hand claps and foot taps and someone slapping a jug. But your heartbeat matches it, and soon you're smiling without effort. A few children form a ring and start spinning in circles. You spot Mila among them, hair flying like ribbons. Then the priest appears, standing at the edge, watching, unmoving. And Selma leans in. He doesn't like joy. You grin. That's because he doesn't recognize it. The fire pops loudly. Sparks leap like fireflies. You take another step, spin once, and feel your shift catch the air. Your heart lifts. You are no longer the girl watched in secret. You are the woman who sees. And they see you now too. On your own terms. The frost comes early this year. It glazes. The well stones turns morning grass brittle beneath your soles and leaves delicate lace on the corners of window panes. You wake with your breath fogging the air inside the cottage and sleep beneath every blanket you own, with Regret the hen pressed up beside the hearth like a judge refusing to budge. Life slows, but it doesn't stop. The goats are shaggy and stubborn now, more resistant to being herded than ever. The hens lay less. The fields have quieted, and the village turns inward like lungs before a deep breath. But something in you stays alert, alive. You've taken to keeping a small journal, just scraps of thoughts, observations, patterns, not names, not direct accusations, just a quiet way of keeping your mind ordered. And Selma calls it witchwork, but only with a wink. I used to write things too, she tells you one morning, until someone found it and burned it with my garden. You raise your eyebrows. Wasn't even a good garden, she mutters. Just leaks and regret. You both laugh. At the market that week, you trade wool for dried apricots and a new comb. The woman who sells them says, "Your hands look like you work harder than your husband." You smile. They do. She leans in. "You speak more freely these days." "I don't speak freely," you reply. "I speak clearly." A few other women overhear. They chuckle. One of them, the young wife of a thatcher, whispers, "I tried sleeping beside my sister after my husband drank too much. He called me cold, but I slept better." You nod, not offering advice, but your presence seems to give her permission. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't just restore. It ripples. You visit the stream, again this time, with Milla and another girl. They gather pebbles and skip them across the water. No fear. Just play. You let your toes touch the edge, watching the way sunlight bounces on the surface. "Do you think there's fish in there?" Milla asks. "Probably." "Do they know it's cold?" You shrug. Maybe they've forgotten what warm feels like. She seems satisfied by that. Later that day, as you hang damp clothes on the line, Joran appears carrying a small sack. "Went to see the man who brews elder syrup in the hills," he says, setting it down. "Thought you'd like some." You peer into the bag. Elderberries, ginger-dried bark ingredients. You know how to turn into something that tastes like medicine and comfort combined. "Thank you." He shifts his weight. "I've been thinking, maybe we could fix the roof this spring. Tear it up and rebuild." You eye the sagging thatch. "That'll be loud. Better than leaking." You nod. "I'll help." It's a simple exchange. Domestic, but layered. He's making plans with you now. You hear footsteps, then quick, urgent. A boy from the far field approaches panting. There's trouble at the church. You and Joran glance at each other, then follow. When you arrive, a small crowd is gathered. Father Eldrick stands at the chapel steps, red-faced, holding something up a scrap of paper, number parchment. This was found beneath the altar. He cries, "Someone is writing lies, poison sowing division among neighbors, questioning God's voice." The parchment flaps in the wind, words scrawled hastily. Something about watching, about silence being complicity. No names, but the meaning is clear. You don't know who wrote it, but the priest thinks he does. His eyes land on you. You say nothing. The crowd murmurs. Someone whispers, "She hasn't been in church in weeks." Another maybe God stopped listening. And then Anselma. She steps forward, voice like a cracked bell. Maybe God started listening to her. Gasps. The priest freezes. You expect him to rage, to shout. Instead, he drops the parchment and turns inside, slamming the chapel door behind him. Just like that, the moment passes. But it changes something. The crowd disperses slowly. No one says a word to you, but a few nod, not just with acknowledgement, with respect. That night you sit with Anselma outside her hut. She pours something strong into mugs and passes one to you. You didn't write it, did you? She asks. No? She nods. Neither did I. You glance over. She smirks. But I know who did. You don't ask. Instead, you raise your mug. To anonymous truth. To loud truth, she corrects. You clink mugs and drink. The frost thickens overnight. When you wake, the world outside looks dipped in glass. You rub the window with your sleeve and see Milla skating on a frozen puddle arms, flailing, laughing like the world never hurt her. And for the first time in weeks, you laugh too. Historians still argue whether women in medieval villages ever truly found community or simply leaned on one another in secret. But you know this. Sometimes the strongest kind of protection isn't a wall. It's a circle. Winter settles in like an old dog, slow, heavy, and hard to budge. The days shrink to whispers. The nights stretch like wool, long and unraveling. Smoke curls endlessly from chimneys. Everything smells of peat-stewed roots and the faint sting of cold iron. Your breath is visible indoors now, and even regret huddles closer to the hearth, her feathers puffed out in protest. But even in this slowest season, things stir. You sit by candlelight at the cottage table, mending a tear in your only warm skirt when Joran speaks up from across the room. His voice is quiet but deliberate. You ever wonder what it would be like to start over? You glance up. You mean, leave. He nods once. Not now, but maybe in the spring, just to see something new, someplace where no one remembers what happened here. You set the needle down thread, still hanging. Wouldn't that make it easier for them to forget? It happened at all. He thinks for a moment. I didn't mean to run, just thought, maybe. A new place might be a new shape. You study his face in the flickering light. He's trying, and you appreciate it. But you also know this running doesn't always free you. Sometimes it follows you, that old shame, like a shadow you can't shake until you turn and face it. Still, you say gently, maybe someday, but not before we fix the roof. He chuckles. Fair. That night, you don't dream. Or if you do, they're quiet ones, gray and soft like the snow beginning to fall just before dawn. By midwinter, the entire village is locked in white. Children slide across icy ruts between cottages. The smithy is nearly silent. No one wants to clank iron with frost-bitten fingers. Bread is denser, butter harder. Even words come slower now. But the stillness isn't empty. It's aware. Especially after what happens one late afternoon. You're at the well gathering water in a bucket that creaks more than it holds when a stranger rides into the village, not on a horse, on a mule. Cloaked, hooded, travel-worn and silent. He asks no questions, just trades salt and a sack of dried figs for repairs on his saddle strap. But the way he watches the chapel as he passes it like it's a familiar disappointment makes people whisper. He stays 2 nights in the barn loft. You don't speak to him, but Joran does briefly. He returns with a furrowed brow. Says he came from a place where a girl vanished after the priest accused her of laying spells on the altar bread. You look up. What happened to the priest? Joran shrugs. Disappeared. Found weeks later with his mouth sewn shut. Wolves had gotten to him. You stare into the fire. Wolves again. Seems to be the season, Joran mutters. The traveler leaves quietly. No goodbyes. No coins exchanged. Just footprints in the snow and a faint trace of wood smoke on the air. Later, Anselma says to you, "That wasn't just a tale he told." You raise an eyebrow. You think it was real. She leans closer. I think people are tired of silence being the only law. The next day, the priest falls ill. Violently. He's seen doubled over behind the chapel, retching into the snow. Some say it's poisoned grain. Others whisper about mold or curses or justice in powdered form. You don't claim responsibility. You don't even feel satisfied. Instead, you feel nothing. And that surprises you. Joran notices you're quiet and asks, "Are you afraid of what's coming?" You think, "No. I think I'm afraid it's not coming fast enough." Still, change isn't all dark corners and whispered revenge. Some of it is delightfully ordinary. One morning, the thatcher's wife knocks on your door holding 3 eggs and a spool of dyed thread. I'm teaching the girls to stitch. They asked if you'd come. You agree. And you do. The group is small 6 girls, 2 older women, 1 child too young to follow, but too stubborn to be left out. You teach them to bind seams and hide knots. They teach you how to laugh while your fingers bleed. One of them asks, "Were you always this brave?" You consider your answer. No. But I was always this angry. They nod. They understand. That afternoon, Mila tells you she wants to learn to write. You give her charcoal parchment scraps, and the first sentence she copies is, "I know what I saw." You don't need to ask where she heard it. At the evening fire, Anselma pulls a strip of parchment from her cloak and hands it to you. Just in case you ever want to write your own sermon, you unfold it. Blank. Your words, your way, your voice. Historians still argue whether rebellion in medieval villages was sparked by great violence or small defiance. But you know the truth, sometimes it starts with a girl holding a quill instead of a confession. And sometimes it ends with a circle of women refusing to back down when a priest demands silence. Snow begins to melt in uneven patches. At first, just puddles under trees, little mud-laced hollows that steam faintly in the weak morning sun. Then the drifts begin to slide from rooftops like spilled cream. The village awakens slowly, unfolding, creaking, complaining. You notice it first in the smell. Wet earth, sap, something green pressing up through death. Spring is not gentle here. It's stubborn. You help Joran mend the fence, squatting in damp earth with chilled fingers. He grumbles about rot knots, his brows as he ties new lengths of cord. You feel the ache of work, but it's a good ache earned. He passes you the last stake, then looks around and says, "We could build a new shed." You glance up. "We barely use the old one." He shrugs. "We've got time now. You're not hiding. I'm not pretending." That makes you pause. He never says much. But when he does now, it has a weight you trust. Back inside, regret has laid an egg. You leave it where it is. She looks proud. Later, you carry dried rosemary and nettle leaves to Anselma's hut. She opens the door with a bone-handled knife in one hand and a smudge of soot on her cheek. "Didn't expect to see you today," she mutters, stepping aside. "I had herbs and a feeling." She pours tea that tastes like bark and memory. You both sit in the doorway, watching the thaw. You know she says in the old days, women like you were blamed for bad crops and colicky babies. I'm shocked. They say a woman seen naked by a man she didn't marry brings ruin unless cleansed. You roll your eyes. Seems like the man should be the one cleansed. Anselma grins. Exactly. She tosses a sprig of rosemary into the fire. Witchcraft. You both laugh. That night the priest returns to the pulpit. He's pale, thinner, voice brittle like frostbitten wood. His sermon meanders parables of obedience, thin warnings wrapped in scripture. But even the regulars look distracted. Milla's grandmother is clearly knitting something. The blacksmith nods off twice. A child coughs too loudly and is shushed, but not by his mother, by the priest. You watch from the back bench. Joran beside you, hands folded calmly in his lap. The sermon ends. No one claps. A week later, he leaves. No announcement, no farewell. His absence is like a bell that rings after the silence. They say he went to the next village to heal. You don't ask if it's from illness or from being ignored. With him gone, something breathes again. The women begin to meet more openly. Not secret circles anymore, just neighbors helping neighbors. Milla reads aloud from her scribbled notes. The thatcher's wife paints strange symbols on her porch. You stitch a shawl, embroidered with thorns, and gift it to the girl who was once too frightened to walk alone. She wears it like armor. That spring, a traveling friar passes through. Younger, sharper, eyes wide, voice soft. He stops at the well drinks and says, "You all seem untroubled." Anselma chuckles from the bench nearby. "We handle our own troubles." He blinks. "That's not the usual way." "Then change your maps." The friar doesn't stay long, just enough to bless the wheat, offer some honeyed words, and leave behind a single book in the chapel. You find it weeks later during a cleaning. Inside is an inscription. To those who speak louder than the wind, may your stories last longer than your shame. You keep it. That night, as the rain taps lightly on the roof, Joran finally fixed you, sit at the table, and write in your journal. Not about Tharn, not about the stream, not about the priest. You write about fireflies, and laughter, and a girl learning to spell her name in ash on the hearth. You write about how healing sometimes feels like splinters rising from the skin. Not pretty, but proof you're still growing. Historians still argue whether post-trauma peace in the Middle Ages came from divine intervention, psychological numbness, or sheer stubborn survival. But you know now, peace isn't something you find. It's something you build. One nail, one word, one stitch at a time. Spring now, fully awake, begins to bloom in loud colors. The field behind your cottage erupts with wild mustard and early clover. Bees return like drunk dancers, bumbling between blooms. You plant radishes, even though Joran says they taste like dirt, and disappointment. Regret lays an egg nearly every day now. You think she might be repenting. Life begins to resemble something ordinary. Only now you notice how extraordinary that is. The village changes with the season, not dramatically, but meaningfully. The girls, who once huddled in corners at the market, now laugh louder, barter harder. The older wives, long experts in keeping their eyes down, now linger just a little longer when the men talk, interjecting opinions under the guise of casual observation. And Anselma. She's started teaching again. Not formally, of course. She's still a crone, still mistrusted by some. But now, there are children watching how she stirs her bruise, listening to her talk about which plants bite and which soothe. The thatcher's boy brings her frogs. Milla brings her charcoal sketches of herbs. You bring her stories, and, on a whim, a spool of red thread. "What's this for?" she asks. "For the mouths we were told to keep closed," you say. She cackles. One evening, you and Joran sit on the stoop, sharing bread and a bruised apple. He looks out across the field and says, "You know, there was a time I thought keeping my head down would keep the peace." You nod. You weren't the only one. He adds, "Now I think keeping my head down is what let everything grow wrong." It's not a confession. It's a realization. And it matters. Later that night, a woman from the next village arrives, travel-stained, tired, holding the hand of a child with long, dark eyes. She's looking for the chapel, she says, but her voice is wary and her shoulders stay tight. You offer her bread, water, a quiet space. She doesn't speak much, but the way she flinches when the wind creaks, the shutters tells a story longer than words. You don't ask questions, but she stays. The next morning you find her helping the blacksmith's wife knead dough. The child chases Milla through a patch of clover laughing. You meet her eyes across the yard, and she nods once. Later that week, she finally tells you her name, and nothing else. You offer no judgment, just safety. You begin to wonder how many women like her pass through places like this, carrying scars, memories, silences that scream. Historians still argue whether medieval hospitality was genuine kindness or calculated obligation. But in this case, you know it's something else. Solidarity, shared breath between survivors. An unspoken understanding that no one gets to name your story except you. That night, while spinning wool into thread, you remember the carved figure you found months ago at the stream, the woman holding her face. You find it tucked in the chest by your bed. You press it into the hearth's warmth and say softly, "You're not hiding anymore." The wind rustles the thatch like a whisper of agreement. The following days unfold in a rhythm: work stories, meals, small laughter, short naps under sun-warmed blankets. You begin to feel yourself returning, not just surviving, but living. And one afternoon, Milla announces she's written her first full sentence alone. "My skin belongs to me." You don't cry, but something blooms behind your ribs, sharp and sweet. The next festival is held beneath new banners, stitched by hands from every household. You embroider vines on yours. Others add suns, stars, fists, and foxes. Joran paints a goat onto one with surprising grace. Regret naturally pecks a hole in hers. It still flies proudly. The food is simple. Stew bread, small cheeses, but shared with warmth. Stories are told. And Selma sings a song so old no one knows the words, but everyone hums along anyway. At dusk, the village elder stands and says, "We've weathered a hard season," then adds after a pause, "We're still learning how to listen to each other." No one claps, but many nod, especially the women. You lean against a tree trunk and breathe deep. This isn't justice, not in the way stories are told in books or court halls. No sentences, no proclamations, no tidy endings. But it is repair, and repair is holy. You watch as Joran lifts a sleepy Milla onto his shoulders, and Selma hands out bruised apples. The stranger from the neighboring village stands quietly, her child asleep in her arms. Someone hums that old song again. You press your hand to your heart, and for once, It doesn't feel like something broken. You wake to the smell of wet wood and honey. The first storm of spring has passed, leaving the world rinsed and strange. Puddles glitter like melted mirrors, and the mud squelches underfoot with every step. The chickens are damp and offended. Regret has taken up residence beneath the work table and refuses to come out. You light the hearth brew tea and sit by the window, watching mist roll over the hills. It's the kind of morning that feels suspended, neither beginning nor ending. A breath held. A knock sounds at the door. It's Milla barefoot and grinning. And Selma says, "Today's the day." You blink. The day for what? She shrugs. Didn't say. Just tell her to bring her sharpest needle and no excuses. So you pack your mending kit, tuck in your shawl, and head down the lane. Aunt Selma's hut is bursting with dried herbs and damp wool. And today, it also contains half the village's women. They're gathered around a long wooden table with scraps of cloth ribbon bone buttons, dyed threads, and one very large piece of linen stretched taut across a frame. You recognize it immediately. It's a tapestry in the making. At the center, a tree, a great twisting oak, stitched in emerald green and bark brown, its roots tangling with golden thread, its limbs full of birds unfinished yet already alive. And Selma waves you forward. Thought you might want to help finish the top. You stand there unsure. Why? Because the story isn't just mine. You take a seat. Milla hands you a needle, and you begin. As you stitch curved leaves, soft blossoms, spirals of bark, the conversations flutter around you like birds. I used to think I was the only one. Mine was an uncle. He never said a word, just stared. I still see him sometimes. In my dreams. My mother said it was my fault for walking alone. Silences fill the spaces between these sentences like mortar. No one flinches. No one gasps. You realize this tapestry isn't decoration. It's testimony. Needle and thread in place of confession. Color and cloth in place of permission. You stitch until your fingers ache. Later, when the light softens and the shadows stretch, someone brings cider. Someone else stew. And Selma unsurprisingly produces something pickled that makes your eyes water. You all eat and laugh and sit close in shared warmth. That night you dream of the tapestry again, but this time the oak is whole. Its roots stretch deep into the ground, curling around bones, secrets, prayers. Its limbs stretch to the stars. You see yourself stitched into one branch, not dangling, resting. You wake with peace in your chest. For the first time, in what feels like forever. The next morning, you walk with Joran to the far field. He's fixing a boundary post. You're just enjoying the sun on your back. As he hammers, he says, "I've been thinking." You hum. We should teach the boys too, about listening, about harm. You glance at him. What brought that on? He keeps hammering. Milla said something yesterday. Said she doesn't think she'll ever trust a man unless he learns early that no means no. You nod slowly. She's right. He sighs. I never learned that growing up. Just learned to stay quiet. You place a hand on his arm. Then unlearn it. He looks at you and nods. That's the plan. In medieval villages, boys were often taught to swing a hammer before they were taught to hold a hand gently. Historians still debate whether violence was a side effect of survival or something more deliberate, something conditioned. But here, now, something else is taking root. Later that week, Milla teaches her little brother to say no like a spell. She instructs him to practice it when someone wants to take his toy, when someone touches his hair, without asking when someone raises a voice that doesn't feel right. He gets good at it. One day, he says no to regret when she pecks his toe. She squawks. He beams. You applaud. At the next market day, a new woman arrives. No husband, just a sack of mushrooms and a wary tilt to her head. You invite her to sit beside you. She doesn't speak much, but after she leaves a small pouch of dried sage behind, an offering, a thank you. That night, you go back to the tapestry. You add something just above the oak. A woman bathing in a stream, tiny and serene, surrounded by willows. Not as a warning, as a reclamation. She's safe there. You stitch her back into the story on her own terms. Later, as Joran joins you on the bench, he sees the new section and says nothing, but he touches your hand lightly and stays until the candle burns out. The tapestry is nearly finished now. It spans almost the entire length of Anselma's hut, stitched with hands of all ages. There are parts of it even you don't recognize, mysteries sewn in by women who needed to leave their truth somewhere, even if it remained silent to others. Tiny keys, closed doors, a figure turned away with a wolf beside her. Symbols of pain, symbols of freedom. It's not beautiful in the traditional sense, but it is breathtaking, and no one dares call it anything less. You run your hand over one of the newer pieces, a pair of eyes wide open, framed by leaves. It's the only part with no body, no face, just the eyes, watching. Who made this, you ask? Anselma glances at it. Does it matter, you consider? No. But it still sends a quiet chill down your spine. The village seems lighter these days. Not perfect, never that, but open, like a window cracked after a long winter. The boys have started helping at the well. The men pause before interrupting the women in the square. Even the chapel, empty now, but swept and clean, holds a strange peace. Some want a new priest. Others don't want one at all. For now, it stays quiet. And that's enough. One morning, you rise early and walk through the mist to the stream. You don't go to bathe. You simply sit. The water flows around your ankles, clear and brisk. You whisper to it, I remember, not to dredge the pain, but to refuse the erasure. A few days later, a boy falls from a tree and bruises his ribs. The village healer, a girl barely 20, treats him with a tincture you once helped brew. She nods when you pass and says, I owe you for that recipe. You grin. You owe Anselma. I just stirred the pot. That afternoon, a vote is held in the square. Anselma proposes that the old barn, long abandoned and half-rotted, be rebuilt as a meeting house, a place where no man has final say, where no woman needs permission to speak. Some of the men frown, but most nod. The motion passes. Joran volunteers the first stack of timber. The next day, while hauling wood, he says, You ever think about what comes next? You pause. Next after what? After the story, after the healing. You smile faintly. Then we keep going, or help others start their own. He looks toward the horizon. It doesn't feel like an ending. It isn't. As summer approaches, the green thickens heavy with bees and growing things. The nights are soft again. The roads dry and crack. Travelers come and go more often now, merchants, tinkers, messengers. Some stay longer than expected. Some leave behind stories they don't wish to carry. You begin to recognize the signs, the hushed tones, the careful glances, the nervous laughter that never quite reaches the eyes. You don't press. You simply offer a place at the table, a warm drink, a chance to stitch a single leaf on the tapestry. They always accept. One traveler, a woman with one hand and a scar running along her jaw, stitches a fox sitting beside a broken chain. She doesn't explain. She doesn't need to. That evening, Milla asks if she can begin her own tapestry. Do I need to ask permission? She adds. You shake your head. You already gave it to yourself. When Joran hears, he offers her a wooden frame to stretch her linen. Says nothing else. Just carves a small bird into the corner and hands it to her like a treasure. You hang the nearly finished tapestry in the new meeting house. It takes 4 women to carry it. One old man offers to help and is gently turned down. It's not that we don't want you, Anselma tells him. It's just that we're not asking. He chuckles. Fair enough. Once, hung the tapestry rustles slightly in the breeze. You swear the tree in its center leans just a bit toward the door as if welcoming all who step inside. That night, someone leaves a basket outside your home. Inside herbs, bread, a tiny stone with a single word carved into it. Seen. You place it on your shelf beside the carved wooden woman from the stream. Neither of them speaks, but you feel them there, watching, witnessing. The next morning, Milla reads aloud a story she wrote. It begins, once a girl was watched by a man who thought she couldn't speak. She pauses, then says, but she did. You clap first. The others follow. The sound is louder than the stream, louder than a priest's voice, louder than silence. Historians still argue whether small acts ever truly change history. But maybe history isn't made by kings or battles. Maybe it's made by women who dare to tell their stories, even if they have to stitch them one leaf at a time. Summer settles over the village like honey. The air is thick and slow, the days stretched long and golden. The goats sleep more than they graze. Regret scratches shallow bowls in the dust and sulks when it doesn't rain. You wake each morning to the low hum of bees and the scratch of linen shifting on the line. Life has begun to feel rhythmic again, but not repetitive. There's purpose now, shape, a sense that the past does not drag behind you like a chain, but blooms quietly at your heels, reminding you of how far you've come. The tapestry is done. You stand before it one warm evening alone in the meeting house. Lantern light flickers over the stitches. The tree at its center is fully crowned in green. Around it are a dozen women, some detailed, others just outlined suggestions. There's a river running through the bottom edge now. A fox. A pair of boots half buried in mud. Someone stitched a single eye open, wide with golden thread. You trace a finger over the figure you stitched the woman in the stream. Her posture is calm. Her arms rest at her sides. She isn't hiding. You press your palm gently to the fabric. This is your church now. Your voice no longer lives in shadows or beneath a man's thumb. It lives here in thread, in leaves, in every voice that joins the gathering circle. Outside, laughter bubbles up from the lane. Milla and the others are preparing for the midsummer fire. The square smells of baking honey cakes and roasting squash. Someone is singing a lullaby you remember from your own childhood, though the lyrics have shifted slightly. You step out into the light and watch. Joran carries a log to the fire pit and wipes his brow. When he sees you, he grins, not in triumph, but in understanding, in a new kind of partnership. You walk together to the edge of the crowd. Children dance in circles. Women stand shoulder to shoulder. The men keep a respectful distance, talking softly, laughing when appropriate. It's not perfect, but it is better. The fire is lit. It climbs into the sky embers like tiny fireflies drifting into the dark. Everyone watches. No one speaks for a moment. You feel the warmth on your face and the tug of something ancient in your chest. And Selma leans in beside you. We started something. You nod. Do you think it'll last? She sips her cider. Only if we keep tending it, like a wound, like a garden. She's right, of course. One of the younger girls approaches you with a strip of linen and a needle. Will you help me start mine? You crouch beside her and tie the knot at the thread's end. Her first stitch is uneven, but it holds. Later that night, back at the cottage, you light a single candle. The room glows softly. You sit by the window with your journal and open to a fresh page. You write, I do not owe silence to anyone. My body is mine. My memory is real. You close the book and exhale. Outside, the last of the fire's smoke curls into the sky. No one's watching now, but if they were, you wouldn't turn away. And now, with your eyes a little heavier and your thoughts a little quieter, we let the night begin its soft descent. You've come a long way, not just through the story, but through the stillness. After it, the reflection, the breath, the quiet stitching together of what was once torn. Let the fire's glow fade gently in your mind. The crackle becomes a whisper. The faces you met, Milla and Selma, Joran, drift into the background like drowsy memories. Even the stream settles again, no longer a place of fear, but of peace. Its water trickles softly in your imagination, cool and clean, surrounded by willow branches that sway like lullabies. The tapestry still hangs in the quiet of the meeting house, each thread pulsing with the unspoken courage of those who touched it. And though your eyes may close, now know that the story continues in the whispered laughter of children, in the hush of women who no longer walk alone, in every voice once silenced that dares to rise. Let your breath slow. Let your shoulders soften. You are safe. You are heard. You are home. And with that sleep may find you not because the world is perfect, but because you've made your part of it more whole. So rest now. The village sleeps, and so can you.